right, everybody. So welcome to the Autodesk booth. We're going to be spending the next hour looking at the Maya Entertainment Creation Suite and Flare on the back end of that. So the Maya Entertainment Creation Suite is 3 applications. It's Maya, Motion Builder, and Mudbox, and we'll be looking at how we can use those 3 applications to efficiently move a character through a pipeline to end up with some finished renders that we'll take into Flare to do some finishing on. So we're going to start off inside of Maya, and from Maya we'll branch out to the auxiliary products, Motion Builder and Mudbox. Maya obviously is a complete animation system, and what we want to do in this scene is get this character skateboarding around this environment. So you'll notice that I've already got a character in Maya, and when you're starting with characters, often you're going to model them up in Maya, Max, Softimage, some application, but you're going to want to put some finished detail onto those characters. And Mudbox is a specific tool that's very focused on doing that task. To get information between these applications in our creation suites, we have something called the single-click workflow. What the single-click workflow does is it allows me to transfer data back and forth by just going to the File menu. And it's using FBX as the underlying technology. So once we've sent that object over to something like Mudbox to begin doing some resculpting work, all we have to do is jump into that application and begin working with it. Whatever changes we make inside of this application, we can send back to the hero application, in this case Maya, through that same single-click workflow. So we'll be using that throughout this presentation to get the information flowing in between Maya, Mudbox, Motion Builder. So what we've got is our character, and this character is very early on in his life, in his production. So we haven't taken the time to lay out UVs on this. For those of you who don't do 3D for a living, what UVs are is it's a 2D coordinate system that wraps around a 3D geometry. And that's how you take something like a flat Photoshop file or a TIFF image and have that apply the texture map and kind of contort to the object's surface. Because we don't have UVs on this character and we want to begin working on it, what we're going to use is PTEX. So PTEX is our mechanism for doing a UV-less workflow. It allows artists to begin working on characters, again, early on in the production. PTEX is an open source file format that was originally developed by Disney. So the first step when working with PTEX in Mudbox is getting the character set up for it. So all you have to do is go and select the model that you want to have a PTEX texture assigned to, go through the PTEX setup. So what PTEX is going to do is it's going to go through and create these kind of components called textiles. And textiles sort of have a relationship to a texture map size. So you can see as I zoom in here on that screen, you can still kind of see it. There's some aliasing problems that are happening. So at 2 million textiles, it's equivalent to essentially if I unwrapped a 1.4K texture map on this character. Obviously, we have the ability to increase this and go all the way up to something like like a 23K texture. Now for a demo, we wouldn't want to be painting a 23K map, but it's important to mention that Mudbox is put on top of a Giggle Texel engine. So this is our next-gen engine that just came out in the Subscription Advantage pack of Mudbox, and it allows us to work with extremely high resolution, a workflow that allows us to get to extremely high resolution texture maps. So we'll go ahead and we'll decrease the resolution of this guy down to something that's a little bit more manageable, something like a 1.4K map's fine. We'll complete that out. And we can sort of zoom back out here really quickly. We'll just simply get rid of that model selection. So when we're working with Mudbox, essentially the way the application setup is we have tools that run across the bottom here. So you have your painting and sculpting tools set up on different tabs across the bottom. Then you have some modifications of the way that tool is going to work. So is it going to have a stamp on the end of the brush as you're laying it down? Are you going to be projection painting through a stencil? What's the fall off of the brush like? Is it a skinny brush, a fat brush? You also have the ability to adjust material presets and lighting presets to kind of control what the viewer is going to display. We're going to leave all the environment stuff set to 0, kind of the default settings here. And the first thing we're going to do is just start to do a little bit of painting work. So we'll jump back to our stamp, kind of make sure that's turned off. And as soon as I touch on my character, I get a pop-up that says, all right, you're going to begin painting. What type of information do you want to paint? So for this example, diffuse is a great choice. And you'll notice that our selection of different types of files that we can paint with are all different versions of PTEX. So this allows us to go all the way up to 32-bit full float. Again, for demo purposes, we'll just keep it at something simple like an 8-bit file. We'll go ahead and we'll apply that. Now right now my texture or my geometry came in at this base resolution. This is sort of the base mesh that was sort of generated out of Maya. When I begin working with this character in Mudbox, what I want to do is I want to increase the resolution of this character. There's a couple of reasons we want to do that. Number one, the PTEX brushes actually work faster the more you subdivide your character. It's kind of a cool byproduct of PTEX. And number two is when we start actually painting relief on this character or trying to sculpt this character, if I don't have a lot of tessellation inside of it or a lot of polygons, I can't capture fine detail. Mudbox has the ability to tessellate an object all the way up to 17, 20 million polygons, and on these HP workstations, it'll actually be able to push that around very, very efficiently and quickly. So what we'll do is we'll just turn off the display of that guy, and we'll just subdivide him a few times. So this subdivision process, every time I do it, gets slower. It takes longer to do the subdivision because it's creating more polys, and we'll go all the way up to level 4 here, which will create probably about 2 million polygons on this character, which will give me the detail that I need to begin working with the sculpting tools, as well as accelerating those PTEX textures like we first talked about. So I've got my pressure-sensitive pen here, and obviously if I just click on this and I start painting, it does pretty standard stuff, right? That's what you'd expect. There are a couple features that are really nice when you're working with brushes, and one of those is the steady stroke. So if you were trying to draw a line across something, what it does is it kind of averages out your hand's movement, and it makes it a little bit easier to get really nice smooth lines. You can see I get that arrow that kind of gives me this direction of which that brush is going. So when you're trying to lay down cut lines on objects or try to do stitching on garments and things like that, that steady strokes kind of technology really helps you and assists you in that process. For this character, the majority of the paintwork that I want to do to him, I want to have be derived from texture maps, and this is something that's very easy to do inside of Mudbox. We'll jump up to our image browser, and in our image browser, I'm just going to grab a stencil that I might want to use as a projection here. So I obviously have some grayscale images, some normal map images. So these kind of have the tangent represented in the color of that file. I'm going to go down here and just grab this image that came off of Google Image. So it's a lizard. Obviously, because we're painting the lizard, it's a good idea to base your textures on reality. You'll find you'll get there a lot faster if you're actually using source images that you're kind of sampling from or cloning from. So we'll go back into our 3D view. I just flipped that horizontally. So once we jump into the 3D view here, I'm going to switch over from a paintbrush to a projection brush. I can hold down hotkeys and start to begin moving this around. You'll notice that it's always telling me what hotkey I can use to interact with this object. Mudbox is one of those applications that anyone could be up to speed in this very, very quickly. It takes a couple hours to learn it because it's very intelligently laid out, and what it does is, again, extremely focused. You can get these applications on the area. Any of our applications, including Smoke on the Mac, are downloadable from the area. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start positioning my character sort of somewhere like somewhere where it's similar to that eye. We're going to concentrate on that eye a little bit first there. So that looks like I've got the angle matched up pretty good. I'm going to make sure that I have mirroring turned on across the x-axis. You can see right here I do. I'll increase my brush size, and we'll just start stamping that information down. So we're kind of basing our textures, obviously, from that. Can begin to change my little guy around here, maybe zoom in a little bit like that, stamp that nose across. So you just kind of try to line it up and use this texture map, find the areas that sort of match the areas of what you're doing, and you can begin obviously getting all this nice, cool, subtle detail. You know, kind of get some of this wrinkle and stuff happening across there. So that's really the workflow for projection painting. A couple of other things that we can do this with this that are kind of cool. Let's just get another stencil in my environment. I'll kind of scale out here. I want to paint across the back of my lizard. So I'll jump back into my image browser, and I'm going to just grab this grayscale scales image and kind of pull that across here so you can see what that looks like. Go back into that 3D view. Oops, I didn't set it. Let's set that guy quickly and go back into that 3D view. And we'll position that, holding down that key, kind of scale that guy up somewhere like, that's a little big, kind of do that. You can always zoom in on my lizard too here. So in this example, what we want to do is we want to paint scales across here. Now obviously I don't want to paint black and white scales on a lizard, so we'll jump into the eyedropper tool, and I'm just going to sample some of that green that we were painting earlier. So we'll just kind of grab a good green value. That one looks pretty good, and I can now use that as my color to stamp across the scales on the back. We have other cloning brushes, airbrushes, things that you'd expect. The dry brush is a really nice one. The dry brush, if you have sculpted detail, it'll either paint on the high areas or the low areas, so you can define, bump up the creases or kind of put some specular stuff on the highlights. Really great brush. We also have a lot of tools for dealing with color changes, so I'll just show a couple of examples of that with the sponge brush. So what the sponge brush does is it either subtracts saturation, and anytime I'm working in Mudbox, if I hold the control key, I'll get the inverse. So if I hold the control key with the sponge brush, it obviously will pump saturation in there. So a couple little things that you can do with the paint tools. The next thing we're going to talk about is sculpting. Everything that we've done so far has been dealing with color, but we also have a great workflow for adding detail into this character. Actually, we'll start off on this back here. We'll do the sculpt some detail into the character's back. So we'll switch to our sculpt tab. I'll just grab this sculpt brush. We'll make sure our stamp is turned off. I'll decrease my brush size. What I want to do here is I want to sculpt these little details in context of that texture map. So obviously I'm just kind of using my brush to kind of pull these guys up, sort of like that, add a little detail in there. And really quickly I can paint in context to my texture map, using it as sort of a reference to sort of get the look and feel of this. And I'm kind of moving through this relatively quickly. Again, I could hold down my control key and pump in those creases a little bit. Next thing I'm going to do is just grab my flatten brush and just use that to sort of flatten out the tops of those so they look a little bit more like scale. So you can see that's just pulling down the tops. So by using a combination of these different brushes, it all have a slight different effect. All these different pinch brushes, grab brushes, you know, the foamy brush builds up a little bit different than the wax brush. They allow me to get to my end result of sort of a scaly looking back on my character here. And obviously if we kind of rotate around that, you can see that we've been mirroring that across both sides. Next thing we want to do is add a little bit of detail to this character's neck. So I'm going to switch from a sculpt brush. This time we're going to use a wax brush. So this one builds up a little bit differently. I'll decrease the size of that wax brush. Sort of go over here, and what I want to use a wax brush for is painting some folds and some creases. Let me increase the or decrease the size of that guy, and I'll overdrive this so it's really visible there. So we'll increase the magnitude of that and sort of paint out some cracks, some creases. I can go back and hold down my Shift key. Shift key does a smoothing effect, so I can kind of flare that out at the end there and sort of smooth that out. So by using these brushes and these different combinations of brushes, you can really start to get to these end results of these kind of skin folds and things like that, so you can really get a sense of what that looks like. So let's go ahead and move forward to a version of this character that's a little bit more finished off. And if I just show all, I'll walk you through a couple of other things that are worth mentioning. You'll notice on the right-hand side here, over here, I've got the attributes that kind of let me get into the more complex view of what's going on with the brush. I also have a layer stack for both paint and sculpt. So if we jump on this character, if I just right mouse click on that guy one time there, oops, you can see that it's now loaded in layers specific for the object that I was just on top of. So this has been built up through a variety of different paint layers. We're painting specularity and diffuse channels, a bump and a normal on this guy. This is very similar to Photoshop. What's on top is going to be the top layer. You have the ability to have opacity. You can do different channel operators, so multiply, divide, things like that, screen, add. So all that paint information can also be saved out as a PSD file if you wanted to. And then on our sculpt layers, what we've got here is I've already built this guy up a little bit. So we add in some scales, we add in some extra wrinkles, we add in something like the body scales. Now we talked about the UV-less workflow. The really cool thing about painting with PTEX is at any given time, if I need to get this into a UV version, and if you're going to a game engine or you're going to one of the creative finishing tools or going out maybe to Mental Ray, you'd want to extract that PTEX information in the form of a UV map. We can do that very quickly and efficiently with our map extractor tools. And this is also how you're going to get that detail represented in a form that would be good for a renderer. So we wouldn't want to bring a 17 million polygon version of this character back into Maya and try to move it around and then render it. We'll bring in that base mesh, and we need to represent that detail, or that sculpt detail, in the form of maps, displacement maps or normal maps. And the map extractor is how we would go ahead and do that. So you can basically say, what's my source mesh or my high-res mesh? What do I want to extract that information into? How big of a texture map do I want it to be? What's the base resolution mesh that I'm trying to get to? So this map extractor tool is really cool. And the nice thing about this is if I extracted the PTEX workflow onto a UV map, my layers also come across, so you don't lose that sort of iterative history that you use to build that up to get to that end result. So it's a very powerful tool to get that information back and forth. And again, to do that, we would just use the single-click workflows where we'd say, go to Maya. I can tell it to update the scene, which would bring the geometry across, or in this example, just update the textures. So if we jump back into Maya and switch over to the Mudbox version of this guy, I've just got him sitting here on another layer, kind of hidden out for me. You can see that we've now got all that texture work essentially showing up in Maya. And the thing that's worth mentioning here is we're doing this in Viewport 2.0. Viewport 2.0 is Maya's next-gen viewer. It does lots of really cool things, like the ability to display normal maps and bump maps at very high quality in the viewer, and it's very, very fast. That's really the two things that Viewport 2.0 is trying to push, is speed and quality, allowing you to make creative decisions early on in the viewer, kind of do pre-visualization work in the viewer. It also does things like really nice filtered depth map shadows, so all these shadows are live in the scene here, and you'll notice that they'll move around dynamically once we start getting our character moving. Couple other things that it does that are really kind of fun and kind of cool. If you look at my scene here, if I zoom really far out, obviously the scale of that character, he's kind of small. So to get this shot looking correct, I'd want to have some depth of field in there to really convey the message of this kind of shallow depth of field, or a fast glass on the camera, if you would. We can do that in Viewport 2.0. So if we select this camera and bring up the attributes for it, oops, let's jump over to the attributes for that camera, go to depth of field, turn that on, drop that f-stop down and get that sort of shallow depth of field. You can see now that we really convey the sense of scale a lot better once we start to put that shallow depth of field in there. So we're working in the Subscription Advantage Pack of Maya 2012. Subscription Advantage Pack brings a couple of new features, and I'm just going to draw your attention to those really quickly because I know I recognize a couple of Maya guys out there, and I'm sure they're going to be excited to see this. The Subscription Advantage Pack has a new node editor. The node editor is a mechanism. Everything inside of Maya is a node. It's a dependency graph. So all we're doing in Maya underneath it is connecting nodes with attributes together. So when we build shaders, we build rigs, we build dynamics. Really underneath it all, they're nodes. This node editor gives me a nice, new, clean way of viewing this, as well as giving me visual cues as to what that data is. So if I grab this and I regraph the input-outputs for that node, you can see that I get different color coding based for the different types of data that's going back and forth between it. So that's one advantage of the node editor over our older legacy windows. Another thing that it can do that's kind of nice is, right now we're displaying all of these connections sort of in a compressed view, but at any given time I can go in there and say, show me all the active connected attributes. The last thing that it can do, and you can do this on multiple nodes or on single nodes, you can kind of refresh these displays, is show me all the connections. So now I've got this big long list, and this is essentially what used to be in the connection editor. So now we can replace what used to take 2 or 3 windows with one window, and at the same time have the data presented to us in a more organized, more visually recognizable manner in the form of this color coding and the ability to compress and contract it. So it's an awesome little tool. Let's go ahead and look at the fact that we can also expand and compress the toggle slides. And if you need to create a node, you don't have to go up to this window here to do it. Now you can just simply hit the tab key and start typing something. So if I type ramp, I get everything that begins with ramp that's a node inside of Maya. I can then quickly just jump down and say texture. I've now just created a node in that node editor. And the connections are just drag and drop. So if I wanted to break a connection, I can just take that guy and delete it. If I wanted to remake that connection, it's a simple drag and drop operation. I've now piped that back into the diffuse channel. So the node editor is new in Subscription Advantage Pack, and it really is about driving productivity and making it faster for our artists inside of Maya to get from point A to point B. You know, there's a couple of other things that I want to bring your attention to as far as Viewport 2.0. I kind of glossed over it quickly there. Bring up the options for this. It does do a couple of things that are really cool. It has the ability to do screen-based ambient occlusion. So as soon as I turn this on, look down here underneath the skateboard. I'll overdrive that so you can really see it. It gives me those sort of contact patches, those ground patches. It also can do multi-sample anti-aliasing. So this is going to use that NVIDIA card to go out there and make all the edges look nice and anti-alias. So if we turn our samples up to something like 16, you know, this display, that bump map on the lizard's texture on his chest, you could really see it get fine. So this is the type of stuff that you would turn on before you would do a play blast for a daily. You know, what we're trying to do again is help that kind of pre-visualization or the very first pass when you're doing stuff get a lot of control in that viewport. It's also worth mentioning that I'm running a little bit of gamma correct on here. If I turn that off, you can see my mids are a little dark, so I was just using that to kind of pump my scene up a little bit and make it look a little bit more visually compelling, I guess, is the easiest way to say that. So let's go ahead and talk about getting a character moving. We've got a character inside of Maya, and he's already been bound. So the binding process is making a relationship between the bones and the skin, the vertices of the skin. So that's been done. If I move this bone around, you can see that that goes along for the ride. When I want to animate a character, I need to get a rig on it. So Maya has a sophisticated set of tools for building rigs, very custom rigs, but it also ships with something called the Human IK Solver. What Human IK does is it gives me the ability to very quickly get a sophisticated rig on this character that we can then begin using to animate or pose our character. So let's go ahead and get that Human IK Solver on the rig. And the first step when dealing with Human IK is teaching the solver about the hierarchy of your skeleton. And this is done through a characterization process with this window right here. All you have to do is double click on the bone and then match it to the corresponding bone in the Maya viewport. You need to populate all of the joints that you see here. So there's 12 joints that need to be populated for HIK to work. If you have extra joints like extra spine joints or extra roll bones down the arms or finger joints and hand joints, the solver will use those and it'll be a more realistic solve. But as long as you get these 12 base joints defined, you're good to go. The HIK system will work. And we can do that a little bit faster by using a template. So if you have a pipeline that's set up and you're using consistent names across your pipeline, you can save a template out to reuse over and over again. For this example, I'm going to use the HIK template, which ships with Maya. You'll notice that it also ships with templates for cat and biped coming from 3D Max. Let's go ahead and apply that. We'll lock this character off, and then we'll just go and create that control rig. So the control rig is this is really what the HIK system is. So that characterization process defines the mapping so the HIK system can be enabled. And now we're going to jump into the character controls window, which gives me a really nice mechanism for interacting with this character. So obviously, if I want to grab one of these end handles or markers in the viewport, I could do it, or I could also make the selection using the character control window. I'm in a body part mode now. I've just switched the type of modifier for how I'm going to interact with this character to body part, and you can see that I get a visual representation as to what bones can be moved with my current selection, as well as what would be keyed if I hit the ES keyframe. When we're working with the HIK system, we're always keying FK and IK at the same time, and that's very important to understand. So if I move this hand around, that's pretty straightforward. It looks like an IK solver. Notice that it stops at the body part. So this is really where it gets interesting. When I go to full body mode, notice that every bone in that UI has now been stroked. So that's letting me know that with my current selection, I have the possibility of influencing every single bone in my chain. Notice what happens when I overextend that arm. The character behaves realistically. He knows that if I overextend that arm, I need to transfer the energy through my shoulder, down my spine, into the character's hips. So this is really what the HIK solver is all about. It's very cool technology, and it runs across a couple of different Autodesk products, including Motion Builder, which is where we're going to go next. So the thing that's kind of neat about Motion Builder and the Entertainment Creation Suite is we're trying to provide you with tools that do specific things. And there may be a tool that's more focused on a certain task. Like Mudbox is very focused on doing sculpting. So in the suite, you get to go to that tool to utilize that power. You also get Motion Builder, which is very focused on doing things like virtual production. So it's a character animation system that takes what Maya does and does it just a little bit faster. Underneath it all, it's like a real-time game engine. So again, to get to it, we do a single click. We can say, send to Motion Builder, update current scene, and then we can jump over to Motion Builder. And in Motion Builder, we have the same scene already set up. It looks very similar to Maya. That's because they're both based on Qt. What that means is the user interface elements inside of here are dockable. So if I grab something like my profiling center, I can move it around. If I want to dock it, I can go ahead and just drag and drop it up there, and it docks, just like Maya. It has Python as its scripting engine. Again, very similar to Maya. So when you're working in the suite, the tools feel consistent. If you look at the user interface for the character controls and the characterization tool, they look the same because they are the same. That HIK system, that's the foundation that Motion Builder was built on. That's really what Motion Builder is all about. So Maya and Motion Builder share this technology. When you're working in a suite, you can utilize the kind of strong points of each one of these applications to drive the productivity of your production. Now, I mentioned that profiling center. I'm just going to pull that back out really fast so you can see that. This is one of the things that makes Motion, this is the differentiating factor in Motion Builder. This is why you're here. It's real time. It's designed for taking motion capture data in multiple streams being bumped into this guy in real time. You might be recording body at 24, face at 60, a video background played at 24. It'll take all that information, record it in real time, track line time code, allow you to have that embedded into your file as metadata, and use that to do this kind of virtual production. Virtual production meaning movies like Avatar, where the characters are, being looked at through this view of the world, and this is the real-time performance animation system where all that starts. So what we've got is this profiling center, and this allows me to see what's tasking my system. Where do I need to start to try to trim the fat to get my frame rate back up? It's a great asset inside of Motion Builder for doing that. So we've got this character. We've talked about the HIK system. He's already set up to work with that, obviously, because he just came over from Maya, and all that work's been already done. What we want to do is begin getting him to be kind of moved around by some motion capture data. Now, we don't have a live stream here at the booth, but I do have some motion capture that's been saved out to disk. So we'll go ahead and just grab that in here. And this one actually has two different takes of my character, so we'll bring them, or two different versions of the skeleton, so we'll bring this one in.